Welcome to the Explainer. We're going to tackle one of those huge classic questions today. If God created everything, well, then who created God? We're going to break down one of the most common answers to this puzzle, step by step, so let's get right into it.
Okay, so the whole question really starts from a pretty simple idea, something that just feels true in our day-to-day lives, right? Everything seems to have a cause. A tree comes from a seed, a wave is made by the wind. Things just don't pop into existence out of nowhere. And, well, that's what leads us to the big logical trap. Because if that first rule is true for everything, that everything needs a cause, then it has to apply to God too, doesn't it? And that's the paradox. That's what makes this whole thing so tricky to wrap your head around.
Yeah, and this little back and forth really gets to the core of it. Jimmy makes this huge statement, and Billy just flips the logic right back on him. It feels like this unbreakable loop, a contradiction you just can't get out of. And that's exactly why this question pops up over and over again.
So, to start unpacking the answer presented in our source, we've got to look at a classic idea from philosophy, sometimes called the domino problem. And the core argument is actually pretty straightforward. For anything at all to exist right now, something, somewhere, must be eternal. It has to have always been here. This brings up a big idea called infinite regress. Now that's just a fancy term for a chain of causes that goes back, well, forever, with no starting point. And the argument we're looking at here says that's just not logically possible. Let's use a really simple, everyday example to show why that is.
Okay, just think about a pencil that a student's using. It didn't just poof into existence, right? Its being there was caused by their mom buying it, which was caused by it being shipped to the store, which was caused by the factory that made it, and you can keep going back. The source compares this whole thing to a line of dominoes. Each event is tipped over by the one right before it.
All right, so what happens if we take that exact same domino logic and apply it to the idea of a creator? What if that chain of who created who just never ever ends? It just goes on and on forever?
Well, the argument here is pretty powerful. If that chain of creators, those dominoes, went back infinitely, the very first one could never be tipped over. And think about it. If the first domino never falls, the second one can't fall, and then the third, and so on. The whole process could never even get started, which would mean, well, we couldn't possibly be here right now.
So, the takeaway from this first part of the argument is that the simple fact that we exist, that's the proof that there had to be a starting point. There had to be a first domino, one that didn't get pushed by another one. An uncaused cause that got the whole chain reaction of reality going. Now, this brings up a pretty obvious question, one you might be thinking right now. Okay, if something has to be eternal, why can't it just be the universe? Maybe the universe itself is that first domino, and it's just always been here. Well, the argument we're following here says no, that's not the case. And to back this up, it actually turns to modern science, to cosmology. It points to a couple of key pieces of evidence that suggest the universe actually had a beginning, that it hasn't been around forever. Okay, first up is the fact that scientists have observed the universe is expanding. And if you run that movie backwards, everything in the cosmos gets closer and closer together, all the way back to a single starting point. And second, the universe seems to have a limited amount of usable energy, and it's running out. Let's really dig into that second point about energy for a sec.
This quote here gives us a really good way to think about it. Imagine the universe's energy is like the gas in a car's fuel tank. If that tank is half empty right now, well then there must have been a time when it was full. It couldn't have been running forever because if it had, it would have run out of gas an eternity ago. The very fact that there's still fuel in the tank means the engine had to have been started at some point.
So when you put those two things together, the expansion and the limited energy, this line of reasoning comes to a big conclusion. The universe itself had a beginning. And if it had a beginning, well, it can't be that eternal, uncaused first domino we were looking for. And that brings us to the final piece of this puzzle. And it's a shift. We're moving from philosophy and science over into theology to look at these specific claims made in the Bible. Okay, so let's recap where we are. If something has to be eternal, but the universe doesn't fit the bill, then this argument puts forward another candidate, the God described in the Bible. The whole focus now shifts to what the text actually says about who or what this being is.
This particular verse from the Psalms is held up as a key piece of evidence here. That phrase, from everlasting to everlasting, is interpreted to mean something that has no beginning and no end. Basically, a being that exists completely outside of our normal timeline.
And right here, this is the direct answer to that first question we asked. The whole key idea is that the question, who created God, has a hidden assumption built right into it.
It assumes that God exists inside of time, where ideas like before and after actually mean something. But if, according to this definition, God created time and therefore exists outside of it, then the question itself doesn't really make sense anymore. It's like it short circuits.
Okay, let's put all three of those pieces together. Let's assemble the full argument and see how it all fits into one single answer.
So here's the three-point answer we've been building. Point 1, for anything to exist, something has to be eternal. That's our first domino. Point 2, the scientific evidence suggests the universe itself isn't eternal. And point 3, the God of the Bible is specifically defined as a being who is both eternal and timeless.
And here's the solution this argument proposes. It says that an eternal, uncaused being exists outside of time, and that being is the cause of everything else, including our universe. So, the question, who created God, is what philosophers call a category error. It's applying the rules of our universe, of time and causality, to something that is defined as being outside of it. It's kind of like asking, what's north of the North Pole? The question itself just doesn't compute.
And so the source material leaves us not with an answer, but with a question for you. Having laid out this whole argument that something must be eternal, it turns it around. So what do you believe is eternal, and what are your reasons for believing that? That's the thought we're left with today.